Right, so for the next session, actually we've got two gentlemen who, in fact, the companies have been with us for a few years now using RPA Supervisor. So this is a fireside chat. I think we need a fire here just to make it a bit cozy. Right, so gentlemen, you're all mic'd up. In fact, we'll start with yourself, Clive, because I think everyone knows Lloyds Bank, I assume, so fairly large bank. I think one of the largest mortgage provider in the UK and so on. So I think everyone knows who they are. TJX, you may not know, but actually you do know. So, Clive, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and say where you're from and who TJX are, please?
TJX are the owners of TK Maxx and HomeSense, which most people know even if you've never been in the store. If you've been to the US, we're TJX in the US. So we're one of the world's leading off-brand retailers. Make that as you wish, but we sell very good clothes for a good price.
Yep, thanks for the plug. So you get plenty of that. So let's start first, maybe Peter, with yourself. Maybe you can just set the scene. If we go back a few years, the beginning of the pandemic, just maybe you can describe both your role, maybe introduce yourself in your role, but also just set the scene for everyone in terms of what Lloyds Bank was up to in terms of automation at the beginning of the pandemic, because I think that's when it really sort of took off, and the government had put lots of strains on you guys, and you guys delivered, and automation played a key part. So maybe you can just set the scene for the guys.
Yeah, so Peter Griffiths from Lloyds Banking Group. So I can own robotic process automation and intelligent optical character recognition. Head up a centre of excellence. So we've got a federated model. We support about 80 developers out there in retail, commercial, risk, finance, insurance, etc., other divisions of the bank. We've been on a robotics journey since about 2017. So we've kind of grown fairly significantly. I think last year, everyone measures robotics in terms of hours back to business. So last year, just over 1 million hours back to the business for robotics. But I think as Homan's kind of said, in terms of robotics, probably gathered pace and gathered a stronger reputation when the pandemic hit. So whilst a lot of people were furloughed, I think me and my team were exceptionally busy, unfortunately, spinning up lots of robots to respond to customer demands. So I think while people had seen the value of robotics and seen the fact that it kind of frees up colleagues to focus on more kind of customer value-adding activities, when the pandemic hit, obviously we had a reduced workforce, particularly offshore, and we had increased demand, so people will be familiar with it. So things like mortgage repayment holidays, lots of customers struggling to pay their mortgages and wondering where they're going to turn to, and things like bounce back loans, and we had to be able to respond to those. So going from maybe customers wanting a mortgage repayment holiday, maybe we had 2,000 or 3,000 of those over the course of a month. We're suddenly faced with 200,000 to 300,000 of those, with a reduced workforce. So we spun up lots of robots to support that demand for those processes and others as well. They're probably the two big ones, and I think that enhanced the reputation of robotics, and people saw how important it was. And being able to make sure the service was always up and resilient and were able to support customers was massively important. And I think that was probably a little bit of a turning point where people kind of saw the real value of robotics. So it's not just about can we kind of shave headcount, can we reduce costs? It's around can we support our customers better when they really need us? And robotics really came to the fore. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. And in terms of sort of the challenges you had with the robots, because you clearly had to scale up very quickly. I mean, the government didn't, I guess the pandemic didn't give anyone much notice, but the government gave you probably even less notice in terms of the things they expected from the banks and your bank specifically. What were the sort of the challenges you had from a robotic perspective, both from, I guess, getting things up the ground and scaling, but also then operating and managing that environment? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I guess we scaled relatively quickly. We soon came to the conclusion that our platform needed to be split. So we went from kind of 1 to 3 now 4 separate clusters to make sure our robotics were resilient. But we also realised we were spending a lot of time doing, if you like, mundane, repetitive, manual tasks. So in terms of with our robots, you would schedule them. But those schedules sometimes needed changing, or quite often needed changing, because your schedules were based on, we think we're going to get this amount of work in today. and actually sometimes you don't. So your robots are looking for work, or alternatively, there's more work that your robots can handle. So a lot of time spent manually tweaking schedules. So I think that was one of the big things. A lot of times putting robots back to work. So robots, unfortunately, do lose connectivity and need to be reset. So we had a control room that were frantically busy, either restarting, resetting robots, or actually tweaking schedules non-stop to make sure that we got the most out of them. So that really, if you think about robotics and what it's about to do, it's quite ironic that we had a robotics centre of excellence and a control room who were spending a lot of time doing manual, routine, repetitive, mundane tasks. So that's why we kind of looked at an alternative and solution, had a chat with what was then RPA supervisor. So.
Brilliant, thanks for that. So, Clive, turning to you, I mean, your situation is different. You're a retailer in the COVID, so you almost had the opposite, in some ways, opposite challenges and not opposite challenges. So maybe, first of all, you can just quickly introduce yourself in terms of your role, and then just set the scene again for people sort of going back a few years, beginning of the COVID.
I am the platform owner for the intelligent automation space within TJX, and that's globally, and also the manager of the COE development teams and infrastructure support. During the COVID thing for us was more interesting because it did demand us to build processes, but it was things like our systems had never been developed for all the stores to be closed. And what happens when the stores close? As you can imagine, we've never really shut the stores like that. So we built processes to actually manage the shutdown and restart of stores in the systems that weren't totally built for it. So that was part of the work we did. We also had to send out RSA tokens to everybody who was going to carry on working when they weren't furloughed. So that was all of the head office people, all of IT were still working, but they had no way of remote accessing most of them. So we're involved in quickly running processes to generate those tokens for everybody. So yeah, we were incredibly busy at the very beginning. And then when the store started up again, we were incredibly busy undoing what we'd done previously. But yeah, again, it proved our benefit to the IT because we could respond much quicker than the system they could have developed.
And that having to sort of scale up quickly or develop stuff quickly, what operationally, what challenges did that create for you and your team?
It's the expectation of that quick turnaround, because we'd managed to do it in a few places and we just had to keep turning these things around quickly. There's no way that the IT systems, it would have been manual changing all this stuff. That's the problem, because they weren't designed to shut down everything and restart everything. It was manual. So you could shut down a single store, but to shut down all the stores across the globe or in the US only was too much work for one person. It was too much work for probably 10 or 15 people. But we were sort of building the processes, which I think it took us 2 weeks to get a good working process. I didn't go through all the resilience and all the stuff we might want, but that wasn't what was needed. It was needed to do the work while we watched the process run. And we got away with it. It worked. So everything shut down and everything reopened. So we were quite pleased.
Great, thanks. So, Peter, in fact, Eric sort of alluded to it and mentioned it earlier. When we spoke, so when we first sort of met and discussed potentially using C2, can you describe just not the challenges, but also what you were looking for? What were the problems you were looking to fix, and what did C2 actually deliver? And maybe you can also touch on what surprised you about what it did, especially around resilience and so on. I think
So I guess we didn't start off with robotics and C2 or RPA supervisor. I'll get used to that name soon. With regard to let's shave costs. So I mentioned that we were spending a lot of time in terms of restarting robots and changing schedule. So that was clearly a lot of waste. But the main reason for looking at robotics was it had become a very, very important part of our operation. So in terms of, I guess, the fact that robotics was a massive success, it was kind of a bit of a curse and a blessing as well, in terms of you can measure your success in terms of when your robot workforce goes down and what noise you get. And we started to attract a lot of noise when the bots went down, even for only a relatively brief amount of time. So your bots go down for half an hour. Do you get a lot of noise in the operation? If the answer is yes, we must be doing something right. They must be adding value. So robotics was kind of seen as something that had become very, very important. So our bots at the moment are probably doing, on average, about 1,000 people's worth of work a day, to give you a kind of an idea. And if you can't suddenly spin up a workforce of 1,000 people and your bots stop working. So what was really important for us in terms of the reputation of robotics was to make sure that we could provide a service that was resilient and safe and recoverable. Certainly when we ran a proof of concept with RPA Supervisor, rightly enough, we found that actually if robots lost connection, they were recovered in a matter of seconds, and they'd be put back to work again. And I think the other thing that I think, Homan, you're alluding to there is, which was something we kind of picked up on, is that it's not just about the robotics platform, but when a system goes down. So one of our mortgage systems went down for a period of time, and there was a concern about, are we going to miss SLAs, or are our customers going to be impacted by the fact that system's unavailable for 2 or 3 hours? And of course, what RPA Supervisor did was put a lot of more workers back on that particular process. So typically that process would have 12 or 12, 14 digital workers. It wasn't available for 2 to 3 hours. As soon as the system came back up and running again, RPA Supervisor deployed 30 bots to that process and enabled that process to be recovered and them to hit SLAs that day. Something that previously would have meant us trying to effectively shuffle around robot resources and change schedules and probably losing a couple of hours, and we probably wouldn't have hit SLAs. So that really kind of hammered home to us the importance of having a capability such as RPA Supervisor that make sure that we can recover service very, very quickly when things do go wrong, because unfortunately they do from time to time.
Brilliant, thank you. And Clive, what about yourself? What was sort of the reason for C2, and what did that deliver for you?
Well, I first saw RPA Supervisor as it was. I'm going to get away with that.
You don't have to pay fines, it's only us.
Well, I saw it because the Blue Prism scheduler, as I've said to Blue Prism many a time, is pretty rubbish. It's not flexible, it's not adaptable. If you've set 5 machines on it, you've got 5 machines on it. It's really stuck. And when I saw the tool, as a technical person, I thought, that is really good. The flexing that Peter just talked about, it's obvious. The ability for it to scale as necessary, pick up where needed. And I talked to my manager about it, and he went, oh yeah, that's interesting. And I said, and it's got these dashboards. And he went, ooh, fascinating. And he really loved it. So the two elements of it, the management of it, the looking at it and seeing what was going on, and my managing the schedules, making life easier for our support teams, reducing the complexity that we were having to add into the Blue Prism schedules, because RPA Supervisor dealt with the logging on and logging off of machines. It dealt with the exception handling and the firing of messages to people. All of that just made our support people loved it, our business people loved it for the messaging, and our developers loved it because it was just easier to manage and change schedules.
I'll probably I can just pick up on what Clive says, or I haven't mentioned in terms of scheduling. I think that was one of the problems we had, even in terms of working out when to schedule bots, because our scheduling server would often kind of crash. We had too many schedules kicking off at the same time. So we had to spend a lot of time planning, okay, we can't have more than X number of schedules running between this period of time. So I guess that was a problem as well for us in terms of effectively a scheduling server not doing what we needed to do. And even in terms of if we planned it as best we could in terms of managing schedules around peak times, invariably some wouldn't start up. And then again, a manual effort to identify which schedules have started up, which schedules haven't. Let's actually kick them off manually. So that was a big headache for us as well.
The other thing RPA Supervisor solved for us was those processes that overran because they had too much work. So we'd have things going overnight and they're meant to finish by 5 o'clock. Too much work was put in and they would run into the workday. And then the systems couldn't cope with the robots and the people working on the systems. So RPA Supervisor, automatically using the work shifts, shuts the machines down at the given time. So it just stops it, pauses the action, and the next evening it will pick up exactly where it was. So that saved us having to manually do it or make sure that the code incorporated timeouts and things like that. So it just managed the work shifts so much easier.
And just in case there is anyone from Blue Prism, rubbish, as I'm sure it has an acronym. It's an acronym, isn't it, for something?
No, I have told them previously. They know, it's not like I'm holding back on this.
So, just from a COE perspective, your perspective and reputation, and from a business perspective, how important or how did that resilience and reliability and stability that the C2 platform was starting to give your organisation, what did that do for your relationship with the business, reputation, but also how the business then saw pre and post, if you like, CTO implementation, how they saw RPA?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I guess in terms of, I kind of think, if you like, it's a hygiene factor. Having worked in operations before, I think no news and no noise is good news. So I think when things go wrong, there's lots of noise. So I think in terms of how we measure success is if people are quiet, people are generally happy. So that's the way I'd answer it, Open. It's probably around, we're there to make sure people expect things to work. When things don't work, that's when people get excited and get annoyed and frustrated. If you don't hear from people, generally that means you're doing a pretty good job. So certainly a huge reduction in noise from my perspective. Yeah.
From ours, we rolled out the dashboarding that the RPA supervisor provided. So we allowed our business people to see what was happening on their processes. So they didn't have to contact us all the time and find out what's going on. Our Blue Prism environment was trapped behind Citrix. So we didn't want to give people Citrix and give them access to the control room in Blue Prism. So RPA supervisor just opened up all that information. They could see their running processes, exceptions that had caused the systems to crash. All of that, they could get that information and then they could get history out. So we're having people using the dashboarding to report to their senior management. So it really just opened up those things and saved us a lot, as the COE, a lot of questions like what's happening, how's it gone, what's been happening over the past week, things like that. It just opened it all up to them.
Brilliant. I have a quote that I really like from one of our clients. They implemented C2 and I spoke to them specifically sort of a couple of months later. I said, oh, how's it going? And the guy said, oh, it's brilliant. The business now doesn't talk to us. So I scratched my head, then I realised what he was talking about. But so that's great. Thank you for that. What about the future? What sort of, in both your organisations, sort of intelligent automation and other things, where are you looking to go next? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, so we get very much kind of hyper automation. So interesting in the previous kind of slides and presentations. So looking at using robotics to fulfil end-to-end kind of customer journeys with some intelligence in there. So looking at interesting the orchestration, if you like, capability or business process management. And I guess what we're looking to do is to effectively not just use robotics to fulfil demand, that's known demand, where customers are asking us to do something, but to actually understand what customers want. So to deploy some intelligence in the front end, so things like process mining, to work out have we not done something that we should have done, and then to trigger a process, so effectively to trigger something, to correct something that's gone wrong, or to respond to an unspoken need from a customer. So whether that be through things like clickstream data or through chats. So what I'm quite excited about is how we can actually use some of the capability that we discussed this morning and this afternoon with regard to stitching all of those different capabilities together. And so that orchestration layer where we can actually have a blended human digital workforce with some intelligence in there that is executing processes either for customers or actually identifying customer needs that we haven't addressed and triggering those. So I think that's the vision.
Brilliant, thank you.
From our side, we're fairly non-automated, which is weird for an automation group. So we want to automate and link everything we use. So we've got an OCR package, we've got Power Platform, we've got ServiceNow. We want to bring them all together and make them function as one application doing the right things in the right place. RPA Supervisor is going to help us, or C2, I will say, is going to help us link the two platforms, the Power Platform and the Blue Prism platform. When working together, there's going to be a lot of power we can extract from the right place at the right time, rather than what we're doing now is wasting time checking. So I think that's where bringing us everything we've got together in one place, and as I said, C2 is really going to help.
Brilliant, thank you. So especially if people who haven't implemented C2 or have not even seen it, in terms of advice someone started from scratch. So imagine yourselves a few years back, knowing what you know now. What advice would you give people? You know, good and bad. We're problem solvers, as Eric says. So if there is any bad, we will take that on board, sort of. But you know, open and honest feedback. What would you advise anyone starting out on their journey now?
I would say that whilst you can move processes to the C2, and they will run as they are now, you will not get anywhere near the benefits you can get out if you don't make changes. Because the way of doing it with the current scheduling method is one big thing, and you're better off making them smaller and more adaptable. So you can run sequenced processes in the C2 product, but you should be looking at how you use work queues and how you make your machines run multi-machine quicker. The more you can run in the multi-machine environment, the quicker your processes will finish. You might be using 30 machines instead of 5, but if those 30 machines are free, why aren't you using them? So don't be prepared that you might need to change your design approach. When we started, we weren't going to. But when we started implementing an RPA supervisor at the time, I'll get away with it, it became obvious that we could make much more benefit if we change our approach. And we have done. And I think we're now using approximately 50% of the licenses we predicted we would use at this time. So it's been a big saving, but it's taken us a fair bit of effort to get that, and we're not even all the way there yet.
Yeah, I guess probably I agree with Clive. I think it depends on the scale. So we've got, as I mentioned, a federated model. We've got about 12 different hubs that we support. And when we rolled out RPA Supervisor, we ran a proof of concept with a couple of those to unlock the value. I think, interestingly, one of those, which was a finance area, their robots ran 70% less time than they ran before, which just goes to show that they were doing non-value-added work because they were just looking for work for a lot of the time. And we invested a lot of time with those two business areas, getting RPA Supervisor working really well, and then we kind of rolled it out to the other areas. And whilst we saw big benefits straight away in terms of resiliency, I think probably, as Clive says, investing more time in terms of getting them to understand the product, its capability, dashboarding, etc. You know, that's if I had my time again, we'd probably do that more quickly and invest a bit more time up front, making sure we can fully leverage the product, more quickly than we perhaps did. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Thanks for that advice. Any questions? I'm just conscious of the time. Anyone got any questions for Peter or Clive? The guys are around. They're going to be here at break, and I think you're going to be boogieing this evening as well. So
I don't know about boogieing.
Not.
Come on.
I don't think you'll let us escape, are you? So.
No questions. Okay. All right. Then, gentlemen, thank you very much. Pleasure
Thank
meeting
you
again.